Here are 20 amazing facts about Formula One that you probably didn't know. Let's begin. Number 20. The first ever F1 driver to win a race without overtaking was Michael Schumacher at the 2001 Canadian Grand Prix. He won by over 34 seconds. Now, this is not because he was so far ahead of his teammate that he could just cruise to the finish line. No, actually, he only made it to the finish line because of a red flag that stopped the race early. This happened due to an accident involving cars from Williams, Jaguar, and Arrows. It's crazy to think that in modern times, with how close the races are, it's hard to imagine someone winning a race without overtaking. However, there have been many instances where drivers have come in first place and not overtaken. Number 19. Did you know that back in the day, the tire supplier was the one who decided what tires each team would use? For example, if Ferrari wanted soft tires for a race, they'd have to ask Goodyear, the tire supplier, and Goodyear would decide whether or not to give them the tires. Crazy, right? These days, teams can choose their tire compounds freely, which makes sense considering that Pirelli, the current tire supplier, is a private company owned by the teams themselves. Number 18. When the Red Bull broke its duck in terms of winning a championship, it became the 10th different constructor to win the championship. That was all well and good until Toro Rosso also ended up winning the championship with Sebastian Vettel in 2010, becoming the 11th constructor to win. What's interesting here is that both the Red Bull and Toro Rosso are technically the same car. This means that if we were to go strictly by constructors, then there have actually only been 10 different constructors to win the championship. And this is why Red Bull has only 10 stars on its logo rather than 11. Number 17. Kimi Räikkönen has spent more time at the top step of the podium than any other driver. And do you know by how much? Well, his closest rival is Lewis Hamilton, but Räikkönen has nearly twice as much time as Hamilton at the top step. In total, Räikkönen has stood on the top step for 341.6 seconds, while Hamilton is second with 179.5 seconds. The next closest would be Jenson Button with 143.1 seconds. Number 16. In 2016, the Austrian Grand Prix saw the first ever virtual safety car period in Formula One. If you don't know what this is, it basically means that the safety car comes out, but instead of driving around the track, it stays in the pits. And this is done when there is a dangerous situation on track, but it's not dangerous enough to warrant a red flag or a normal safety car. And interestingly, the rules state that a virtual safety car will be deployed when there is a risk to the drivers, but not enough to warrant a red flag or a normal safety car. But the race director has the authority to deploy a virtual safety car even if there is no danger to the drivers. So in short, it's kind of like a warning message that tells the drivers to slow down and pay attention. And this can be useful in situations such as heavy rain or if a car loses a wheel and the debris hasn't been cleared yet. Number 15. There have only been 3 instances in F1 history where a team has won both the drivers and the constructors' championship in the same year. This has only happened 3 times, and those years are 1938, 1964, and 1974. The Red Bull came close in 2012, but Sebastian Vettel only had a 3-point advantage over his teammate Mark Webber, which meant that if Mark Webber had scored 4 points more than Seb, and Seb less than 4 points, then the title would have gone down to the final race. Ultimately, though, Sebastian did win the championship. So congratulations to Red Bull for being the most recent team to achieve this feat. Number 14. There have been 21 different nationalities to compete in Formula One. And do you know which nation is leading the way? Well, the UK takes pole position with 54% of all drivers coming from the United Kingdom. Italy is second with 16%, and Germany and France are tied for third with 8% each. Oh, and did you know that Canada and Brazil are the only 2 non-European countries to have produced an F1 world champion? Number 13. The very first race to ever be broadcast live on television was the 1950 British Grand Prix. And do you know what channel it was broadcast on? BBC, the national broadcaster of the United Kingdom. Number 12. Max Verstappen currently holds the record for the most wins in a season with 15 wins in 2022. However, Michael Schumacher also has 15 wins in a season. But if we look at the number of different circuits at which he won, then Max Verstappen takes the crown. Number 11. There have been several occasions in F1 history where the same driver has won both the first and the last race of a season. Only 6 drivers have managed to do this, and those drivers are Alberto Ascari, Juan Manuel Fangio, Graham Hill, Jim Clark, Niki Lauda, and Sebastian Vettel. Number 10, although the current hybrid engines look pretty cool in 2014, Bernie Ecclestone, who was the CEO of F1 at the time, said that he hated the new hybrid engines because the sound of the current V8 engines is what brings in the crowds. He specifically said, "I'm against the new formula. We don't need the help. What we should do is make the V8s better rather than change them." How wrong he was. The current hybrid engines not only sound amazing, but they're also more powerful and efficient. And although the crowds may have been used to the old V8s, the fans of today absolutely love the sound of the current hybrid engines. Number 9. Fernando Alonso has competed in more races than any other driver in F1 history. He's currently on 350 races and counting. The next closest would be Kimi Räikkönen with 350 races. But Kimi's last race was his 350th race, whereas Fernando is still going. So yeah, this record is safe with Fernando. Number 8. At the 2010 Korean Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso was lapped by his teammate, but still managed to finish ahead of his teammate. Now, if you're thinking how is this possible, then let me explain. During the race, Fernando pitted for fresh tires, but his teammate stayed out on his worn tires. As a result, the teammate had to pit, and this meant that he lost a lap to Fernando. However, the teammate pitted for newer and softer tires, which were faster. So even though Fernando was lapped, he still finished ahead of his teammate. Number 7. For a long time, the Indianapolis 500 was part of the F1 calendar, but after a lot of arguments between F1 and CART, it was removed from the calendar in 1960. However, Bernie Ecclestone tried to add it back onto the calendar in the late 1980s and even into the 1990s, but failed to do so. He then tried again in 2008, but talks stalled, and it wasn't until 2011 that the wheels started turning once again. On June 2011, negotiations began between FOM and Tony George, the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And on October that same year, an agreement was finally reached to bring the Indianapolis 500 back to the calendar. However, it seems that they went back on their word because the Indianapolis 500 is still not part of the F1 calendar. Number 6. Back in the 1960s, there was no official retirement age in F1. However, after Joe Bonnier passed away during the 1967 German Grand Prix, FIA introduced a minimum age requirement of 22 years old to compete in F1. Today, there's no maximum age limit, which means that if you're good enough, you can compete in F1 no matter how old you are. And this is why F1 has an oldest debutant in the form of Robert Wickens, who made his debut at the age of 49. Number 5. From 2005 to 2007, there was a point system similar to the one we use today. However, in 2008, it changed. Instead of awarding 10 points for a win, they awarded 1 point for a win. They did this to make races closer because teams would now be more likely to score points if they had a slower car. However, this led to some controversy when Timo Glock almost won the 2008 championship with a win in the last race. Had he won the last race, then he would have won the championship. But since he only got 1 point for winning the last race, he ended up finishing 4th in the championship. This controversy led to them changing the points system back to the one we use today. Number 4. After Mario Andretti won the 1978 championship, he went on to become an American sportscaster. Number 3. Until the introduction of the Halo, the cockpit of an F1 car was completely open, meaning that if a driver crashed hard enough, their head could be exposed to the elements. But it wasn't always like this. You see, from 1950 to 1951, the drivers sat in covered cockpits, but after that, they switched to open cockpits. Then from 1968 to 1971, they were closed off again, but they were open for most of the 1970s. And it wasn't until 1981 that open cockpits became the norm. Number 2. A while ago, there was no official governing body of F1. Instead, the sport was governed by a set of private gentlemen's agreements between the major players of the sport. However, after the terrible crash at Le Mans in 1955, the French government banned all racing events. This included F1. But a few weeks later, a delegation led by F1's founder, Bernie Ecclestone, traveled to France to negotiate with the French government. Eventually, the ban was lifted and F1 was allowed to go ahead. Number 1. Do you know what the first ever power steering failure in F1 was? Well, it happened at the 1976 Spanish Grand Prix, and it happened to the great Niki Lauda. But luckily for him, he was able to keep control of his car, and he went on to finish the race. However, he did have to retire a few races later with a mechanical issue. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to stick around by clicking the subscribe button below.